First thing I noticed wasn't the house. It was the shoes. A pair of worn-down flats sitting outside the front door, the kind with the sole peeling away at the toe, held together by what looked like a strip of electrical tape. I stood on that porch in my good traveling coat, my rolling suitcase behind me, and I stared at those shoes for longer than I should have. Something in my chest went very quiet. I had driven 11 hours from Houston. I hadn't called ahead and wanted it to be a surprise. I should back up. 12 years ago, I left my daughter in a 3-bedroom house in Lubbock, Texas. Not abandoned. I want to be clear about that because I know how it sounds. The house was paid off. The savings account had $60,000 in it. My name was on the deed. Her name was on the deed, both of ours together, the way I had arranged it specifically, so that no one could touch it without both of us agreeing. She was 26. She had just married a man I had met 3 times. I had reservations about him. The kind of quiet, low-level reservations a mother carries but can't always explain. But she loved him, and she was an adult. And I told myself that was enough. I left because I had a job offer in Alberta, Canada. A supervisory position at a long-term care facility, the kind of offer that doesn't come twice at 61 years old. The pay was nearly double what I was making in Texas. I told myself I would stay 2 years, save aggressively, and come back with enough to retire comfortably and be useful to my daughter in ways that actually mattered. Money, security, the things my own mother never had. 2 years became 3. 3 became 5. There were complications with my immigration paperwork. A lawyer who took my money and disappeared. A process that stretched and stalled and stretched again. I couldn't leave while my status was unresolved. I couldn't get back in if I left. My daughter knew this. We talked about it in the beginning. Long calls on Sunday evenings. She sounded fine. Her husband sounded fine. She said she was taking a ceramics class. She said the neighbor's dog had puppies. Then the calls got shorter. Then they got less frequent. Then there were months when I would dial and the phone would ring and she wouldn't answer. And she would send back a text that said busy, talk soon, and I would tell myself that was normal, that adult children pull away, that I was being clingy. I should have gotten on a plane. I know that now. I knew it then, honestly, somewhere underneath all the reasons I gave myself not to. But I was afraid of what I would find. And then I was ashamed of being afraid. And then enough time had passed that showing up felt like an accusation, and I didn't know how to do it without making things worse. So I stayed. And I sent money when she asked, which was occasionally, and then more often, and then very often, always with a short explanation that didn't quite add up. The water heater, the car registration, a medical bill she was vague about. I sent it every time. I never said no. That was the one thing I kept doing, even when I didn't understand why she needed it, because it was the only way I knew I was still her mother. And then she stopped asking. No calls, no texts, nothing for 8 months. I tried her husband. His number was disconnected. I tried the house phone. They'd had a landline when I left and got a recording saying the number was no longer in service. I looked her up on Facebook and her account was gone. I asked my cousin in Amarillo, who had met her once at Christmas years ago, if she'd heard anything. She hadn't. That was when I went to the Canadian Immigration Office and told them I had a family emergency and I needed to go home. It took 4 more months to sort out, but I sorted it out. And I drove from the Houston airport straight to Lubbock without stopping except for gas. And I pulled up in front of the house I had bought in 1987 with my first husband's life insurance money. The house I had raised my daughter in. The house I had put in both our names because I wanted her to have something that was hers, no matter what happened to me. And I saw the shoes. I knocked. There was a long pause. Then the door opened and a woman looked out at me, and it took me 4 full seconds to understand that the woman was my daughter. She was 41 years old and she looked 60, not in the dignified way, not the silver hair and good bones way. She looked like someone who had been tired for a very long time and had stopped expecting the tired to end. Her eyes were careful in the way that eyes get when they've learned that questions are dangerous. She was wearing a cleaning apron over a shirt I didn't recognize, and her hands were the hands of someone who had been scrubbing things for years. She said, "Mom." Just that, one word. And then she looked past me at the driveway as if checking for something. I said her name. I said, "Nora." She stepped outside and pulled the door almost shut behind her, like she didn't want anyone inside to hear us talking, and she took my hand and squeezed it hard and said in a low voice, "You shouldn't have come without calling." I looked at her face. I looked at the door. I looked at the apron. I said, "Whose house is this?" She looked down. "It's complicated." It was not complicated. What it was, I would spend the next 2 weeks uncovering piece by piece, and what I found was this. 3 years after I left for Canada, my son-in-law had persuaded my daughter to refinance the property. He had told her they needed the capital to start a business. He had brought the paperwork to the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening, and she had signed where he pointed, trusting him the way you trust a person you sleep next to. And what she had signed, though she didn't fully understand it at the time, was a deed transfer that added his mother's name to the title and removed mine. His mother, a woman I had met once at the wedding who had shaken my hand with both of hers and told me I had a beautiful daughter. That was in year 3. By year 5, the business didn't exist. The money from the refinance was gone. My son-in-law had quit 2 jobs and started drinking in a specific, methodical way that people who are trying not to call it a problem tend to do. His mother had moved into the house, and my daughter, who had tried to leave twice and been talked or maneuvered back both times, was living in her own home the way a person lives in a place that doesn't belong to them anymore. She cooked. She cleaned. She was handed a list every morning. When his mother had guests, Nora served them. The phone calls had stopped because he had taken her phone and given her a cheap prepaid one with no internet access. Her Facebook account was gone because he had the password and had deleted it himself. The money I sent had gone into a joint account he controlled. She had my old email address written on a piece of paper and tucked into the lining of a winter coat in the back of the closet. She had been carrying it with her for 4 years like a kind of talisman. She had never used it because she was afraid of what he would do. I sat at the kitchen table in my own house and listened to her tell me this in pieces, quietly, while he was out and his mother was at a hair appointment, and the whole time she talked she kept checking the window. I want to tell you I held it together beautifully. I want to tell you I was calm and strategic and didn't make a sound. The truth is, I had to go into the bathroom and run the faucet so she wouldn't hear me. But I pulled myself together. Because I have been a woman in this world for 63 years, and I have learned that falling apart is something you do later, in private, when the work is done. My son-in-law came home that evening and was not happy to see me. He said he didn't know I was coming. I said I didn't know I needed to announce myself in my own house. And I watched his face do something quick and adjusting, the way faces do when a person is recalculating. His mother came down the stairs and smiled at me with her mouth. I told them I was staying for a few days to visit with my daughter. I said it pleasantly. I said it like a woman who doesn't know anything yet. The next morning, while he slept in and his mother watched her programs in the living room, I got in my rental car and I drove to the county clerk's office. I had the original deed. I had kept a copy, all those years, in a folder in my filing cabinet in Alberta, along with my own mortgage documents, and Nora's birth certificate and a photograph of her at 7 years old on a horse at her cousin's birthday party. I am the kind of woman who keeps copies of things. My mother taught me that. She didn't have much to teach me with, but she taught me that. The clerk was a young man with reading glasses pushed up on his head. He looked at what I put in front of him. He looked at the documents on his screen. He said carefully, "Ma'am, when did you say your name was removed from this title?" I said I didn't know it had been until yesterday. He said very quietly, "You might want to talk to an attorney." I already had one. I had called her from the parking lot of a gas station the previous night while my daughter was asleep. She was a real estate attorney out of Houston, a woman I had used 11 years ago when I first bought the property in Alberta and needed someone to review the cross-border paperwork. I had kept her card. I am also the kind of woman who keeps cards. I told her everything in about 20 minutes, standing outside in the November cold in my coat, and when I was done, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Forward me the original deed. The refinancing documents if you can get them, and whatever you have showing the transfer. I'll tell you what we have." What we had, it turned out, was quite a bit. The refinancing had been done with a forged signature, not Nora's signature, mine. My name had been removed from the deed using a document that purported to show my consent, but the notarization was fraudulent. The notarization was fraudulent. The notary stamp belonged to a man who had died 2 years before the document was filed. My attorney found that in about 40 minutes. She had seen this before, she told me. Not often, but she had seen it. We also had 12 years of wire transfer records showing money leaving my accounts and entering theirs. We had text messages Nora had saved quietly, carefully on a piece of paper she had tucked into that winter coat along with my email address. Records of his telling her that the money was for the house and for the business, and later, more recently, nothing at all. My attorney filed with the district court. She contacted the county clerk's office. She called me back on a Thursday afternoon and said, "I need you to be at the house on Monday morning. Can you do that?" I said yes. I want to tell you about Saturday, though, because Saturday is the part I think about most. My son-in-law had gone to watch football at a friend's house, or so he said. His mother had gone to her sister's, and Nora and I sat on the back porch in the cold with cups of coffee, and for the first time in 12 years we just talked. Not around things, not carefully. She told me about the ceramics class, the real one, the one she had taken in year 2 before things got bad, and how she had made a bowl that she was proud of, and how he had dropped it accidentally on purpose. She told me about a dog she had briefly taken in from a neighbor, and how it had disappeared one weekend when she was visiting a friend. She told me about calling a women's shelter once and then hanging up because she didn't know how to explain that it wasn't that kind of situation, except that it was. I told her about the immigration office. I told her about the lawyer who took my money. I told her about the Sunday evenings I had sat by my phone in Alberta and told myself that no news was good news even while something in me knew it wasn't. She didn't blame me. That was the thing I couldn't entirely forgive myself for. She didn't blame me, and she had every right to. She just said, "I think we both spent a long time convincing ourselves it would get better on its own." She was right, and I was the adult, and I should have known better. Monday morning came. My attorney was in Houston, but she had arranged everything through a local colleague and a sheriff's deputy, and they arrived at 9:15 while my son-in-law was eating breakfast and his mother was upstairs. The deputy served him with papers. My attorney's colleague stood in the living room and explained in plain language what had been found and what the court had ordered. My son-in-law looked at me from across the kitchen. He said, "You did this." I said, "Yes." He said something else, uglier, that I won't repeat here. The deputy told him to collect what he needed for the next few days, and to be off the property within the hour. His mother came downstairs with her hair in rollers and her face arranged for an argument, and then saw the deputy and rearranged it quickly. She looked at me. I looked back at her. They left. Nora and I stood in the kitchen after they were gone. The house was quiet, in a way it probably hadn't been quiet in years. She looked around at it slowly, like a person trying to remember something they used to know. There was a civil case. The fraudulent notarization made the criminal referral straightforward. My attorney had flagged it to the DA's office, and the investigation moved faster than these things usually do. My son-in-law's attorney negotiated a plea. He pled guilty to deed fraud and was sentenced to 3 years probation and ordered to pay restitution. His mother, who had known about the fraudulent transfer and had benefited from it, was named as a co-respondent in the civil suit. The settlement covered most of what I had sent over the years. I know there are people who will say 3 years probation isn't enough. Maybe they're right. But Nora didn't want a long trial. She wanted her life back. I made my peace with that. I stayed in Lubbock for 6 weeks. I helped her repaint the living room. I fixed the screen door that had been broken since before I left. We drove to Amarillo one weekend to see my cousin, and we ate at a diner on Route 60 where Nora ordered a piece of pie and ate the whole thing without checking whether anyone was watching. And I had to look out the window for a minute. She started seeing a therapist in December, a good one, a woman who specializes in coercive control situations, who told Nora in the first session that what had happened to her had a name, and that having a name for it was the beginning of being able to talk about it clearly. I went back to Alberta in January to finish my notice period and pack my apartment. I came back to Texas in March. Permanently this time. There are things I can't undo. 12 years is 12 years. My daughter carried something for a long time that she should never have had to carry, and no amount of legal action or fresh paint or pie in a diner on Route 60 changes that. I know what I missed. I know what I told myself instead of knowing it. I think about those shoes on the porch, and I understand that what I was really afraid of when I didn't get on a plane all those years was exactly what I found when I finally did. But I got on the plane. She's sleeping in her own room now, in her own house, with her name on the deed and mine beside it the way it was always supposed to be. She's taken another ceramics class. She made a mug last month and left it on my nightstand with a little note that said, "For your coffee." I drink my coffee out of it every morning. That's the whole story. I keep coming back to those shoes on the porch, the worn-down flats with the electrical tape holding the sole together. I've thought about them more than I've thought about the court papers, more than I've thought about the plea agreement or the restitution check, because the shoes were the truth before I was ready to hear the truth. They were sitting right there in the open, and some part of me understood them immediately, even before my mind caught up. What happened to Nora didn't happen all at once. That's the thing people don't always understand about situations like hers. There was no single morning when everything changed. It was gradual, a permission asked here, a decision made there, a boundary moved so slowly that by the time you looked back you couldn't quite say where the original line had been. Her husband understood that. He was patient about it, the way people are patient when they're building something they don't want you to notice being built. And I was far away, and I told myself that no news was good news, and together we made it possible for 12 years to pass. I'm not interested in letting myself off the hook for that. I made choices. I had reasons for them that felt real and legitimate at the time, but I also had a daughter, and the two things were always in tension, and I chose the reasons more often than I should have. What I've had to sit with, really sit with, not just acknowledge and move on from, is that love without presence isn't enough. Caring about someone from a distance, sending money, telling yourself they're fine, that's not the same as showing up. It's not even close. What I know now, because Nora told me, because her therapist helped her find the words for it, is that the cruelest part of what her husband did wasn't taking the house. It was taking her sense of her own judgment. By the end, she couldn't trust her own reading of a situation. She would think something was wrong and immediately convince herself she must be mistaken. That's what years of careful, patient manipulation does. It doesn't just take what you have, it takes your ability to recognize that something's been taken. That's why I think the most important thing any of us can carry is the willingness to look clearly at what's in front of us, even when looking clearly is uncomfortable. Not paranoia, not suspicion, just honesty. The kind that says this doesn't add up, and I'm going to find out why, even if the answer is hard. I had that quality somewhere underneath everything else, and when I finally used it, when I walked into that county clerk's office and laid the papers down, it moved fast. The truth was never hard to find. It was just waiting for someone to stop looking away from it. And then there's what Nora did. Quietly, over years, she kept my email address on a piece of paper in the lining of a coat. She didn't throw it away. She didn't convince herself it was pointless. Some part of her held on to the idea that the situation was not permanent, that there was a way through, that she was worth reaching for. That kind of persistence, quiet and private and maintained under real pressure. I don't have a word for it that feels big enough, but I know it when I see it, and I see it every time she hands me a cup of coffee in that mug she made. The people who did this to her lost everything they took, and then some. That's not a coincidence. When you build your life on something that isn't yours, a house, a woman's compliance, a forged signature, you build it on something that will not hold. It was always going to come apart. The only question was when. We're planting tomatoes in the backyard this spring. Nora picked the seeds. She says she wants to grow something from scratch and watch it actually make it. I think that sounds about right.